opposing gloves here, and today we're going to be doing a little bit of DaVinci Resolve versus Vegas Pro. Now I use both programs. I've edited over 1,000 videos plus, probably closer to 1,200 videos inside of Vegas Pro, and I've edited around 50 to 60 videos in Resolve, and I have a mixed workflow at this point where I'll do the majority of my editing in Vegas and color correction, green screening stuff inside of DaVinci Resolve. I just want to share with you some of the reasons I do the things I do and point out the differences between the two programs. And they're both great programs. You could totally do entire projects in both. I'm just going to share with you sort of some differences in case you were wondering and wanted some sort of a feature comparison. Not necessarily a one is better than the other comparison. So let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, so to start us off is the number of cursors you have when editing. So I could come in, have a playback cursor going in Vegas. You see it's going, I get my preview and whatever, but I can zoom in independently, move around. I could, for example, split this and trim it. Maybe there's a problem with the audio and I want to adjust that separately. I could do all manner of things while it's still playing back. I could be previewing. It's an extremely fast way to edit your stuff. And once you've gotten a taste for it, it's pretty hard to let it go. But Resolve sings a different tune. Actually, a lot of editors sing a different tune. They have it so that in here, you've got one cursor. It is both your playback and your editor. And also in Resolve, at least by default, when you zoom in, it makes it so that you cannot leave the page that it's on. This is on by default, and it's something that I'm pretty sure you can turn it off, but I'm not 100% sure. So that's annoying to me, and it's there by default, and so I sort of count it as a strike against them, just because that's another thing the user would have to figure out. And when you're in here editing, you can't like make cuts and things while you're working. So it's a much slower way of working. Up next is importing. So inside of DaVinci Resolve, the way I usually import my footage. Now there's a bunch of different ways. I'm just going to share with you the way I typically do. And I usually just grab my footage, drag and drop it, and away I go. Now, Resolve has this thing where they want your video tracks on one side and your audio on another. I don't know if you can change this, but if you can, it's another thing you'd have to go and look up how to do. And it just makes it a little harder to tell what goes with what because they're separated by all these tracks in the middle. I'd much rather have my video and audio directly together. Now, you get used to it. They do highlight for you, so that's nice. But if you're like, somewhere, if you got a lot of video and audio tracks and they're off screen from each other, and then you have to move tracks around, it just becomes an extra chore that you have to do. So I'm not the biggest fan of the way importing currently works with the drag and drop method. Now, if I come over to Vegas and I do the same thing, drag and drop, I can have it insert new tracks for me, and I can work this way. I could drag it down below, and it works that way. And, I'm able to very quickly get editing. Things are grouped really nicely. So I think this is a bit smoother of a way to work. And so I like this one a bit more. Up next is the UI freezing or not letting you access menus while playback is initiated. So in Vegas, this never happens. This is a non-issue. So if I'm playing this and away it goes and I want to save it, I go up to file and I hit, save as or whatever. Playback's continuing on its merry way, no problem. It's letting me do, pretty much whatever I want to do. And it makes previewing and editing just a lot smoother and less intrusive, like no weird events ever happen to you. But if I come over to DaVinci Resolve, for example, and I do the same thing and I say, hey, I'd like to save this, I hit Control-Shift-S, it won't even let me open the menu. It says, no, you got to stop what you're doing. And if I come up to File, okay, so let me show you. So now if I hit Control-Shift-S, it will let me save it. Suddenly it'll let me do things. This is true if you're in like another menu and you're doing things and then you want to go, like say I have playback here. I can't switch between the menus because that can cause issues. And so while it is stable, it is highly inconvenient. And sometimes it will let you do things, but then the UI will freeze and then it will try and catch up to where it was. And you'll get these weird audio glitches and you'll have to rewatch something just to make sure that area of the take is good. and it's just not very smooth. I currently don't like how this has been set up. All right, so up next is group editing, and there's a couple of things I want to cover here with group editing. So first, when you're doing things with, like, say I've got a green screen take and then I've got a background, and often I have additional camera angles and they're all synced up, I like to have everything just on one massive group. And so they're all in the same group. And that way, when I hit, split, it splits everything. And I'm very easily able to just go in and move things around very quickly. And if I want to, say, trim one particular event, I can just hold shift and it will move that one event, but it will not remove it from the group. It's still part of the group. Also, when I drag events like this, it knows to start trimming that one when the others line up with it and to remember where I cut it. And this is extremely intuitive. It makes a lot of sense to me. It doesn't shift this event when I start shifting these ones until they line up, which to me makes way, way, way more sense than what Resolve does. So there's that. Also, if you want to remove an element from the group, you could simply just click on that one element and just hit U. And boom, it's now a separate element, no longer attached to the group. We can select them all and just hit G, and now they're all part of the group. Making groups and removing from groups and editing groups is just so intuitive. It makes so much sense inside of Vegas. It's one of the reasons I use Vegas for the editing. Now, if I come over to Resolve, Resolve has some similar features, but they are different. So in Resolve, you have linked groups, and the way you have to make these groups is considerably more complicated. The keyboard shortcut is Control-Alt-L, and that will link or unlink things, but you have to do a series of clicking because it keeps them all highlighted when you do things. And so there's a lot more keyboard shortcut wizardry that you have to just be on top of. You have to remember to click off of things a lot more easily. Like, let's say I want to remove just one element from the group. Like maybe see, now this is like what makes it so hard is if I go for an audio or a video event, it deselects all of the other events. It's just not intuitive the way they have it for their selecting and deselecting of groups, because of this way it groups. It has like a subgrouping it doesn't tell you about. And so I don't like that. You can individually crop things, or not crop, but like slice and move things around. If you hold down Alt, it'll actually do that for you. But if you do this and then move it around, for some reason, things will become unlinked, even though it shows that they're still linked. And if you click off and then click back on, suddenly the selections will reconnect with each other. So the links aren't like true links. And when you begin to move one thing, it trims this one too. Like, I don't understand why I'd want this behavior. I don't want that event to start moving. So there's maybe someone in the comments will enlighten me on why you'd want to do this. But to me, I do not like the grouping at all the way it's being done currently. It's a lot more of a hassle, and I'm constantly having problems with deselecting things that I want deselected, or only selecting events that I want selected. It's just, I haven't wrapped my head around it quite yet. And I've done a lot of editing. You get the hang of it and working around its sort of quirks. Mostly I end up clicking off into some area where there's no track. And so that means that sometimes I have to like move around on my, on this area to try and get somewhere that there is somewhere clear to click. And just a bunch of reasons why I'm not as big a fan. Is it workable? Yes. Does it make sense and feel smooth when you're doing things? In my personal experience, I don't think so. Up next is the shortcuts. The shortcuts in Resolve just make way less sense than they do in Vegas, at least in a lot of cases. And one of my biggest things is when you right click on something, you can't use any hotkeys within the menu to speed up your process. Say I want to normalize something. I'd like to be able to just hit N. As soon as I right click, hit N, and boom, the normalization pops up. That's not how it works here. But if I go to Vegas, they underline the different letters that will automatically act as shortcuts. So we can very quickly run through menus. So normalization is actually a little clunkier in Vegas, but say I want to go to it, it's in properties, which is highlighted P. So you just right click and hit P, and boom, you've got like normalize right there. You're able to normalize, and away you go. So that's something that I just don't like, the shortcuts. There's other things too, like the grouping was an example of one. Control-Alt-L. Who in their right mind is going to think of this? Also, splitting events, you hit S inside of Vegas, split S. Makes a lot of sense. Group is G, ungroup is U. It's a single key. It makes so much sense. If you go over to resolve, you hit Control Alt L. It's like, what the heck? Into split events, you have to hit Control B. So I don't like this. And another thing too with the single cursor playback that I didn't mention was inside of Vegas, if you move your playback, your edit, and you want to play back from here, say you're editing this and you want to check it, it'll actually go back to where your edit cursor was last placed. This is super convenient for very quickly moving your playback around instead of having to come all the way up to the timeline to do this. Now, granted, I work in a lot of audio programs that do that, so I'm kind of used to it. So this wasn't a big deal to me. But I click, like you saw me do it earlier. I tried clicking to start playback over there. No dice. It says, no way. You got to start from where this was. There is another playback option that's hidden, and you have to know to go look for it so that it actually will just start from where it last stopped. But the playback options here, I'm not impressed. I don't like it. It's less intuitive to me than it is in Vegas. All right, so up next is normalization. So in DaVinci Resolve, it's quite a bit more sophisticated normalization, but it comes with a bunch of things you have to be aware of. So if I have, for example, 2 linked tracks, if you want to normalize these things, so you right click, you go to normalize audio levels, they have a lot of additional options. Also, you can't move this window for some reason. I don't know if it's just mine, but it's a floating window and I don't know why you can't move it. But you come in, you've got all these different options, like some incredible options in here. So I want to, gain it up. First, when you click normalize, it takes a long time compared to pretty much every program I've done normalizing in. And it also, it doesn't tell you how much it's gaining it up by. It doesn't, I wish it would. They've got this cool relative option, which will consider the tracks together. But if you want them done independently, you go to independent, which by the way, in my experience has been iffy. Sometimes for some reason, it still doesn't normalize it to the level that I told it to. I have to completely unselect the track. I'd have to unlink it, click away, select the one track, and then normalize it, which has happened a lot more than once. So if you get that behavior, I get that same behavior. But anyways, let's say you've selected it, you've got it on independent, you hit normalize. It'll normalize them both. This is actually going at an okay speed for what Resolve normally does. But they have like a whole DAW built into it, which is why I'm kind of confused the normalization being as slow as it is. And it'll normalize your stuff. So the normalization is there, but it's definitely been finicky for me, even though it's more sophisticated. And I really don't like the fact that it doesn't tell you how much it's gaining it up by. Now, Vegas, quite a bit simpler in the normalization category. But if we come in, we hit normalize, it's going to tell you how much. You can tell it to recalculate it. It's just a simple normalization. None of the fancy true peak stuff, but I use separate plugins that take that stuff into account anyways for my audio. I always have just like a basic limiter on the end that's got true peak stuff in there, so I don't care. But I really like that I can see how much it's been normalized by, and I can hit OK, and away it goes. It is super, super fast. I almost never have to wait for things to be normalized. So for me, it's a bit of a toss-up, mostly because Resolve is a bit finicky for me sometimes, so I don't entirely trust it. But it is really cool to have group normalization and independent normalization along with all those different loudness standards. So that's very, very handy and kind of a must-have for some people. Whereas Vegas does your classic super fast normalization, just divide by the biggest number and boom, turn everything up by whatever amount you need to. And, away you go, you're on your way. And I have other plugins to deal with all the more sophisticated loudness measurements and standards anyways. So I actually prefer Vegas in this case, just because it behaves kind of the way I expect it to. And I trust it a lot as far as it doing what it's supposed to do. Up next is ripple edit. And what I mean by ripple edit is when you move things that everything after them shifts. So you just hit Control L. And that turns on the ripple edit down here in Vegas. And for example, if I trim things, everything after follows. And, this is cool. I've never really liked ripple edit as a major way to work. I typically have it off, but there are different modes. You can have only the affected tracks move, or you can have everything move. You can have certain things move. And these are your only options inside of Vegas. And they're not really baked in any way. Just sort of, it's this global thing. You either have it on or you have it off. Whereas in Resolve, for example, if I put a cut here, so I hit Control B, and by the way, when you cut things, either the thing highlighted can get cut individually, or you can do a global cut if nothing is highlighted, which is kind of cool. So say I want to delete something. If I actually delete this one using the delete key, it'll actually delete everything around it. And that's not a great example of it being used. It's actually very, very handy sometimes. If you have just one thing, like this isn't even linked to the other events. It just says anything that was in this region that at the same time as this. So the event starts here and ends here. It's just gonna chop it off and slide everything over. And this can actually be really handy sometimes. But if you don't want that, you can just hit backspace and it will only delete that one thing. At first, it takes a while to get used to, but I actually really like it. And it makes the ripple effect a lot more predictable and sort of just baked in. It works the way I think it will work a lot of the time. Now in Vegas, it also works the way I think it'll work. I just have to be aware of what mode I have on. And, you know, just knowing about that. The thing about Vegas is sometimes if I have all on without realizing it, I'll have some event in some track, you know, like 5 tracks up that I don't remember is there. I'll edit and I'll have that on without realizing it. And I'll think only those things have shifted. But that one event at the top will shift all the way over to the last event. And it'll screw up all the editing on my other timelines that I'm not looking at. I'll do all this editing and then I'll realize I've made this mistake. And that is a lot of undoing. And sometimes you just can't really fix it. And you have to redo a lot of work. So I have had that happen to me in Vegas on more than one occasion. But it's just things to be aware of. There are differences in the way the ripple edit works. As far as which one is better, I can't really say. I really like the fact that Vegas has these different options. And as long as you're aware that ripple edit is on and what's going on, it's a super fast way to get some things done that would take a lot of extra steps to do. All right, so this next one, it was one of the main reasons I was trying out Resolve in the first place. And that was text cropping and panning, all those kinds of things is not fun inside of Vegas. But there are things now that I've worked in Resolve some that I've realized I do like about Vegas. So for example, say I've got myself down here in a corner. And if I want to move that around, there are 2 places I could do that. So each clip has its own localized sort of transformation option. So you click this pan and crop event, and I'm able to change the frame size and stuff within the clip itself. But the thing is, I'm not able to grab it on the screen. And this is not intuitive at all. But occasionally, especially when working with images and stuff, it can be handy to make like static adjustments here and do your panning and cropping here. And then I can come over to the track. Now this applies to every clip on the track. And I can click this guy. And again, I'm not able to grab the image on here, which just bugs me to no end. It is a bothersome thing to me. And I can click and drag and change things. And one of the things Vegas does that I, for the life of me, cannot find out how to do in Resolve is I can scale to a specific corner. See, I can go to just that corner. I can change my position, X, Y. I can unlink the X and Y and do some weird stretching things if I want to. For example, if we do something like this, you know, I could do sort of whatever I want here, and it makes a lot of sense to me, the way that it works. But inside of Resolve, it is quite a bit more intuitive in that, say I want to edit this. Now let's move this track up. Okay, so let's say I want to just perform a different transformation. You just click right here, and then boom, I can, you know, move myself around. The way I've done my green screening here, I have this black edge around me. I can deal with that later. But, you know, I'm able to move myself around and very quickly position myself. But as far as like scrolling to one corner, because that's what I like to do. I like to be able to just take it and drag to a corner and just shrink myself down to like one corner or another. That's I still don't know how to do it. So if someone knows how, let me know. The fact that it's so unintuitive that I've given up and just do this now is, I think, kind of sad that this isn't an option. Like, that to me is a really common task that, you know, you're going to do a bunch. Of course, it depends on what it is you're editing, but I'm just kind of surprised. Like, how often are you going to want to put things in different corners? Like, all the time, especially if you have like 4 video events and you want them to go to one in each corner. It just seems to make sense that that would be an option. So just kind of surprised that it's not. Similar to Vegas, Resolve has transformation clip stuff per clip. So for example, if I'm on this clip and I keyframe the transformation and then I move forward by some amount and I move this transformation down, and the transformations are very, very easy to do. They make a whole lot of sense. They're very easy to work with. Inside of Vegas, if you want to do that, you actually have to come in and you need to make sure that you're locked if you want to use this, which is the way I typically like to do it. And then you add a keyframe this way. You move along and, you know, you do whatever adjustments you want to do. And I'm on the wrong area. I want to use this one because this works for the whole track. It's a little more intuitive. So let's say I add a keyframe here. We just hit the add keyframe and then I move along. Hey, why didn't it add the keyframe? I want a keyframe here. Okay, there we go. And then over here, I could have, you know, like some other keyframe. And I'll automatically put it there as soon as it detects a change. And I'll start to move around, which is great. So I actually don't have a problem with either keyframing way. I know a lot of people don't like Vegas's keyframing. Personally, I don't care too much about it. It's fine. It does what I want it to. All right, so text. Text is something that I know a lot of people don't like the way it works inside of Vegas. I personally don't mind it that much, but if you right click, you can go to insert text media. You get some text and you're able to move it around. But if you have the text on a track that's already got like track pan and crops and resizings and things, when you try and move it in here, it will move. And by the way, I don't know why you can move text in this window, but for some reason you can't move images. Please, if someone knows a way to move the images directly in here, let me know. It would be way easier to do. But as I move it around, you see that it gets cropped off in some places because of the way I have my image for the entire track. So this is confusing. I'm not the biggest fan of this. Also, I wish you could type the text that you want here, or the font, I mean. So say I want a font that starts with M. I'd like to get Mile, or no, let's say we're going for Megrim. You know, you can't type Megrim. It only takes the first letter. I would really like to be able to just type the font and have it autocomplete and hit enter. That would be so much more convenient. Now, neither one does that, so that's something I just kind of wish was implemented in general. But other than that, for the most part, it's fine for me the way text works. Typically, you're going to have a separate track with text events anyways. The only other thing is when you come in to edit your text, there's a separate pan crop, which sometimes can be a bit confusing. So if you want to edit it directly in here, you have to click this first edit icon, and you can like resize and do stuff in here. But the sample text, when you type, is so big. It takes up so much of the window. Why can't they scroll it out a bit by default? I always end up doing this anyways. I end up scrolling out so I can write what I want to write instead of it being so zoomed in. I don't know why it's like that. That's a really, really small thing, but it always occurs to me because I always end up zooming out. Now, if we go over to Resolve, I've already got a text event in here. Let me show you. So there's no convenient insert text event thing, which to me is a slower workflow. It would make sense for me to be able to right click on the background and have the ability to generate text immediately. That's going to be really common. And to generate just solid color backgrounds at least. Those two are things I think could definitely be added to a right click. But you come to your generators and you grab a text, you put it on. And in here, the way text works, it can't be confused with track properties because there are none in Resolve, which to me is cool, but not cool. It's a simpler way of doing things, but at the same time, it's kind of like a bummer that I can't just affect all regions on a track right away. But I really like the way text works inside of Resolve. It just seems to be a little more straightforward. They give you a good amount of room right here, and you can come through and edit things very easily. But yeah, as far as text in the two, the big one is you just need to be aware of in Vegas that there's this track properties that you should also be aware of, which to me is a plus. But as far as, you know, Resolve against Vegas, I personally think they're both fine options. Neither one really outshines the other in terms of just the text event. Resolve will definitely win because it's got fusion built in, and so there's a lot of extra powers that you can get with text that you just really can't do inside of Vegas. But that's a whole nother discussion. All right, up next is green screening. The green screening inside of Vegas Pro is pretty sad. I don't like it at all. I don't trust it at all. I get iffy results at best when using it. Like OBS is better green screening than Vegas Pro does. You're going to want a third-party plugin or something. And what you're seeing here is not being done inside of Vegas Pro. I did this in DaVinci Resolve and then imported that as a video with an alpha format already so that I just don't have to worry about green screening in Vegas. I have tried several times, and you can do all sorts of tricks to get green screens, but your green screen had better look dang friggin' good and clean. And even then you could run into small problems. So inside of Resolve, man, Resolve does amazing with the green screening. I can even have a fan going and my green screen moving, and it still does a killer job at the green screening. It can salvage bad green screens. They have a whole color tab. Like, Vegas is pretty much destroyed in this area. Like, it's not even a fair fight. Resolve is so much better. So I'll actually do my green screening in Resolve and then come and do a... there's like a bunch of ways to green screen here too. You've got ways to do it in Fusion. You've got the color tab option. I mean, it just completely hands down wins. Resolve does. It's not even a competition here. And this is one of the things I'll actually come in. I'll do my green screen and Chroma Keying in Resolve, and then I'll export it and bring it into Vegas for the editing, because the editing workflow is just way, way smoother inside of Vegas than it is in Resolve for me. So yeah, there's that. In fact, in this one, let me see if I can actually turn off let's just reset this. So this is what it looked like before. And you can see the green screen is actually moving around like side chaining. You can create cool. Look at that. That's actually going on right now. And if I hit Control Z and we undo to where we had it, that's really, really good for a terrible green screen. So that's how good Resolve is at this. So that's not even that. Unfortunately, Vegas Pro is simply not good at it. But to sort of just really push it in, Resolve is like amazing at it. Like it's like a prodigy at doing this kind of a thing. Anyways, green screening and color keying and graphics effects, because they have in Resolve, you've got this whole Fusion tab, and you're able to come in and add your own media effects and create small animations. All that stuff, not even sort of worth mentioning Vegas's power in this regard, Vegas Pro anyways, because it's really geared only for editing. Resolve will win all that stuff right now simply because it's integrated. It's really easy you just right click and create a new Fusion clip, and you can start doing video effects and stuff, and it's all right there inside of with the editor. So it's just really convenient. Vegas Pro does have a program that you have to buy separately, and right now I don't know how they're integrated or anything, and so right now Resolve definitely wins in that category. Up next is the audio editing. I actually like Vegas's workflow more, and here's why. So I usually work inside of the edit window inside of Resolve. And, I do whatever I'm going to do. But if you want to add like effects and VSTs, I'd like to have just an effect button here, add it, and then boom, it's on my track, and I don't have to go to another window to do this. But for whatever reason, they have this other window that you have to go to. And I think this window is great. I think there's a lot of neat abilities in here. But half the time, I just want to add it like a compressor and a limiter, and that's it. I don't want to come in here and do like a bunch of stuff. And so it's just a little more convoluted in the way that it works for what most people are going to be doing when it comes to the audio editing. If you're going to be doing like serious audio editing, I'm usually going to be opening up a DAW to do that. I'm going to do it all in the DAW and then hand a stem over to whoever's going to do the video stuff. So this is really cool. It's basically a DAW, but it's not cool in that you have to come in here to do that. I mean, for me, I just envision an FX button being right here. You click that, you add your effects to your audio track, and then away you go. That to me is the way it should be, but it's not. Inside of Vegas, you don't have a whole separate fancy different window to do that all in, but they have the effects button. You click it, you add your effects like I have here, and I'm done. It's all on the same page. I don't have to go anywhere. I never left the window. Like, it's amazing. I really, really like the simplicity that this has. Now, if you hit Control-Alt-5, they do have a mixing window, and you can do all your mixing and stuff in here. It's not as fleshed out as Resolve is. Resolve definitely wins. If you want like a whole separate area to do stuff in, Resolve wins there. But for me and what I'm typically doing inside of a video editor, I actually like Vegas more in this regard. Number 11 is the compatibility with the format.mov. So inside of Resolve, you can just bring .mov files in. They work right away. No problem. And this is a big deal because the .mov files are the ones that have the transparent background option. And so Resolve is great for that. And it just opens up and it works. For whatever reason, you got to go through a lot of weird stuff to get Vegas to work with it. Now, obviously, I'm using that because it's pretty easy to set up one time. And all you do is you go up to Tools, or not Tools, Options, Preferences. And first you come in, you go to Depreciated Features. So this is a feature they turned off, which I don't know why. I mean, I'm sure there are technical reasons. I'm not the biggest on all the video technicalities. But you can turn the QuickTime plugin on to let it read .mov files. And then you have to install a codec. And right now I use the Grass Valley codec because Resolve can export that. And instead of having to re-green screen inside of Vegas, which I very quickly realized Vegas just isn't up to the task for that, I could just come in, and now these are actually .mov files. And you can go to the Properties in the Media tab and turn on the alpha channel. And that's how come this is transparent right now. Actually, if I turn this off and hit OK, you actually see the black box that's behind me if you don't include the alpha channel. So, yeah, so that to me is just another thing that if you are going to go with Vegas Pro, you're probably going to want to install that if you plan on doing anything with green screens or anything with alpha channels that are in the .mov format, because it's very convenient. And yeah, I just don't know why it's not natively supported. You can get it working, but it's just one of those things that's like, hey, why isn't this just built in? So there's a difference there. All right, so this next one is Vegas, for whatever reason, creates tons and tons and tons of these little files. And they're not put in any sort of an order that makes a whole lot of sense. They're typically stored wherever you store your project file. And I'm not sure if there's a way to sort of streamline this. There's so that when you drag in a waveform, the waveform shows up. And it loads faster when you have these files. A lot of programs do this. Pro Tools does this. It's a very convenient way. Just the way they're handled is just very intrusive. I'm not a huge fan of it. There are ways of hiding the files. But when you delete your project file, you also want to delete these because you're not going to be using these anymore. And it's just a way bigger hassle. Resolve does not have this problem. Everything is a lot more streamlined in that regard. But for whatever reason, Vegas still does this. They've done this for a long time. I don't know why. They haven't tried to clean this up. I guess it's something not a lot of people care about, but man, it's everywhere. It makes things look very messy. All right, so another one for me is when you bring a video or audio in, Vegas will tell you how fast it is or where it is at loading that thing. So say, for example, I get rid of some of those files that make it load fast, and I drag this in. It tells you down here at the bottom, it says, hey, we're building the peaks for this one, and then it's going to do the other one, and it lets you know that it's getting it done and it's reasonably fast at it. Resolve, because their files are somewhere else, I can't directly delete these files, which I guess that you could argue that's a pro for Vegas, is if you want to rebuild the cache files for this stuff, you can. But man, Resolve tells you nothing about what it's doing, how these things are loading, if they're even loading. Sometimes it like just never appears like there's anything there. And then when you hit play, it suddenly appears. And so I don't like that. It's a small thing, but I don't like it. Especially if the files are very long and big, you have no idea if you have enough time to go and, you know, get a drink or something and come back and you can just start working. Or if it's there and you see it and you don't know because you haven't hit like play yet, or sometimes it shows up on its own. It's very, very finicky in this way. And this brings me to my next point, which I have looked to see if Resolve has this and I simply could not find it. And that is the ability to do data zoom. So you see these waveforms, if you want to make them bigger, that's too bad. I could not find out how to do it. I looked online, I dug a bit through the manual. It's probably somewhere in there, but it's in no place that's like intuitive to reach for or get to. And so this is something that if it does exist, I just haven't found it yet, but it's very, very handy. Like these are small waveforms. I want them to be bigger. You could always drag the files up, but this is like, also when you zoom in, this is about as far as you can zoom in, which is not very, you can't get down to the sample level. I am saddened by this. It's very handy when you're syncing audio up, but if you go into Vegas, you can zoom in so dang far. Let me click. You can just keep zooming and zooming. You can get down to just the dang line that's moving. And you can also hit shift up or down to do the data zoom. So if this exists in Resolve and I just haven't found it, that's great. I've done a number of Google searches though, and usually that's something that you find like in a tips or tricks video or something. And I simply just have not come across it in the various times I've convinced myself it's got to exist. So there's that. And so I really like it for this reason. Also the additional zooming, like check this out. Like if we just get really close, look at that. It's so easy to sync things up and you can zoom in that far. Like Resolve stops like right here. It's like, nope, you can go no further than this. And it's been a pain. And if things are really, really soft, you just pump them up and like you pump them down. So I really, really like this. This next one kind of blows my mind a little bit. So in Vegas, you want to open a new project. Say you've got some work done in another project, and I very often am opening another project. And so it makes sense, right? I come up to File, and I go to Open, right? Control O. A lot of programs have this. You go to Resolve, you go to File. There is no obvious open project. I'm not even sure if it exists. I have to close Resolve down entirely to do it. If I hit Control O, I get nothing. Like, is there really, like, I have a hard time believing it's not there. Just because it kind of blows me away. But apparently there's no open project option. And so it's an inconvenience. So would it be a deciding factor? No, but it's certainly an inconvenience. And one that I'm just kind of amazed that this is a thing. They've got import, export, but I've not come across one. So if it exists and it's there and it's just named something really weird, let me know. The fact that there's just no obvious open project here or here, just kind of, it blows my mind. All right, up next is navigation. So navigating, the zooming and navigating here is a bit different in both programs. So for example, if I scroll my mouse wheel, I go across instead of up and down, which to me doesn't make sense. And if you hold shift, you can go up and down, but you have to have your files big enough to be off screen. And now I can go up and down. And this is something I had to turn on as a special setting. So to me, their navigation by default makes no sense, and the navigation with modification is also strange. The mouse wheel goes up and down. It should scroll you up and down or zoom you in and out or something. It should not move you left to right. You should, most programs you hold shift and it does it. So in Resolve, it's kind of backwards. You get used to it though, so it's not that big of a deal, but it is a bit strange. And if you want to zoom in on where something's at, you have to hold Alt and scroll your mouse wheel. And mine scrolls to wherever the playback cursor is, which is a thing I had to turn on. I think it was originally wherever my mouse is. So there's that. Now in Vegas, wherever your edit cursor is at, oh, what the heck? So in Vegas, wherever your edit cursor is at, that's where it's going to zoom. So if I start playback, and then I place my edit. I can zoom in wherever that's at. And it's so fast to do it. And my mouse wheel zooms in and out, which to me is very intuitive. Shift zoom scrolls me left and right. And if things are off screen and I hold control, I scroll up and down. And this is very standard stuff. Like lots of programs use these keyboard shortcuts. So I prefer the navigation inside of Vegas. There is one other difference that actually I like how Resolve does it more. And that is if you middle mouse click and then push, you'll actually drag to whichever way. I'm not the biggest fan of this. I'd much rather have the hand panning kind of way. And that's the way it works in Resolve, where you middle mouse click and you move like this. It's a lot more precise. And if you're zoomed in, this is typically how you're going to want to move around because you can move by very precise small amounts and you can do it from anywhere. So this is one of the few cases where Resolve actually, I think this is the one thing it does better in terms of navigation. Where everything else I think Vegas has down. And I've gotten so used to just clicking and zooming that the hand pan is not something I'm typically usually reaching for because the zoom just works so well. All right, and finally to wrap it all up is when you have two events overlapping, they'll automatically create a crossfade. This is something I really like and prefer. I don't know if you can turn this off in Resolve, but the way it works in Resolve is if two events overlap, the one you pushed on top wins. It just deletes the other one. I don't like this. I'm not the biggest fan of this. Because look, now it's gone and there's no crossfade. You have to go and add a transition. And a lot of times you're going to want like a crossfade or something. So I don't like this as much. I really much prefer the auto crossfading that happens. To me, it's a more intuitive kind of a thing. Now, what Resolve does have though is when you trim events like this, you can actually grab in the middle and trim one and it will fill it in with the other one. This is a feature I never use though, because I'm usually trying to get rid of stuff anyways. And I don't want the stuff from over here to fill that in. I want these to just ripple over or just this one event to ripple over. And so it would make more sense for me to do a ripple edit there. So this is a control that, while cool, I rarely end up using because I don't want to fill in the way it's sort of suggesting. Also, it's not working the way I want it to right now. This is another, see the whole, also deselecting and selecting a Resolve. I found it's hard to tell when it's going to, see now it does it. I don't know. I haven't quite figured out when it will do one or the other. So there you go. That's sort of my comparison there. I will use Resolve for some things sometimes, especially the green screening and color correction. But as far as editing goes, Vegas is just so fast that I'm actually willing to do some stuff in Resolve and then bounce over to Vegas to do the final edits and stuff just because of how quick it is compared to this way. Now, of course, everyone's going to make their custom keyboard shortcuts and you're going to have ways to streamline things. So if you have other views or thoughts on things, maybe you think I've got something totally wrong, feel free to drop it down in the comments. I'm always willing to improve and learn. But this is just, my experience is why I do some things in Vegas and other things in Resolve. If you have any questions about this, let me know, subscribe, and have a blessed day.